And here we go. Good morning, guys. Well, welcome St. Patrick's Day, 2021. Yeah, we've already read St. Patrick's breastplate. We did not record that portion, but it's a tradition, standing tradition with us here with the Moot Men. So let's dive into our study. We're looking at the Gospel of John, and I probably don't recall, but at the end of last session last week, I said, we're going to do a little more examination. We've been looking at these layers of perception, of growth, of consciousness, whatever you want to call it. And we're going to look into it one more time. And then next week, we'll actually launch into chapter 7. So the opening statement that I actually came up with this. It was informed by some thinking that I have been meditating on of the idea that sacrifice of living things has been something with humanity from the get-go. It started, I don't know how it started, but the idea of sacrificing the young virgin to the gods to satisfy the pagan ritual what we recognize as pagan ritual. The firstborn, the something that is precious to die, something has to die. And in that dying, there is a resolution. There is something satisfied, in the Jewish tradition. And boy, this would be really an interesting discussion to get into. But there was the whole sacrifice of the animal system, animal after animal sacrificed. An entire commerce was built on this whole idea. And then later on in the New Testament, I think it was in the book of Hebrews that that the blood of bulls and goats does not take away sin. There was this informing process, and of course in our belief there is the cross, the cross. So we know intuitively as a human race that something must die. Something's got to die. Very interesting author to read on this is Rene Girard, who talks about this very subject, the idea that we need something to blame. We need something to place and to take the blame, the proverbial scapegoat. It's in our psyche. We know intuitively that something must die. The problem is we continually kill the wrong things. This is the human condition, is that we kill the wrong things. We kill each other. We gain a skilled or a skewed view of human existence. We kill within the church one another through doctrinal bombs that we throw, grenades at each other. There's this killing, there's this continual need to place blame. And as I'm stating here, and I believe that the problem with the human condition, we may call it the fall, is that we kill the wrong things. So that's kind of the preface of what we're going to talk about today. Quick review. I won't go over the whole thing. We went over detail last week, but this third layer, we're in the third layer here, and late in the third layer, which is the use of power, where I'm learning the use of power. We find ourselves in a state, and this usually it comes later in life in our culture. It's something that we experience that, I've got a mortgage, I've got 2 cars, I've got a wife in the traditional sense, I've got a couple of kids. And at some point we're, we living life here in this in these first three layers, which most of humanity exists. And we start to really ask some serious questions, either believer or not, we're asking questions. Last week, I equated it to being swallowed by a great fish, and we're in the belly of the fish. We find ourselves powerless and in the dark, and there's no hope and any effort that I'm going to get myself out of this fix. That is a really, really tough place to be, but it's actually it serves as a gateway. I believe it's God behind the scenes drawing us into a bigger reality, into a bigger picture. So anyway, that was last week, and then we went on and we talked about the darkness can continue as we go around and just rearrange the furniture, trying to find the purpose of life. It's when a lot of men get in trouble by making very poor choices, and it's a very difficult time. It's driven by a higher need of something more. Breakthrough occurs. A breakthrough does occur through the letting go of one's self-constructs. Now, where I put this in scripture is when we read about the grain, when we read about Jesus who says, "Follow me," this is what he's talking about. If the resurrected life is the other side, the cross is the way to get there. The way we get there is we die. And what Jesus's message is die before you die. Learn to die, learn to let go. Paul talks about the struggle of the old man. Paul talks about in, where is it, where he says, for me to live is Christ and to die is gain. That is a comment, that is a declaration of someone who has broken through. And it's not like we break through once and we never go through there again. Paul states as an older man, I die daily. We learn how to die. This is what this is about. We learn how to die so that as we go through, we can look back and we see our former years. We see life on the outside of the former layers much differently. And that's what we're going to talk about today, to give some examples. The soul indicator. This is absolutely critical. The soul indicator that breakthrough has occurred is evident in an emerging capacity to include the negative. That is a huge step. In our binary way of thinking here, we as human beings cannot include the negative. We do everything we can not to include what we identify as evil, what we identify as wrong, what we identify as destructive. We have no clue how to include that into the bigger picture. But what we have learned from our study is that Jesus included the negative. He allowed he allowed Judas to maintain his position within the disciples, and it's absolutely critical. It's absolutely foundational to this role of following him. In order to follow him, we have to include the Judases. We have to include the negative in our lives, and that guys, that just puts us on tilt. We reject it. We don't. So that's wrong. That is, well, through the release of control and through the dying process, we learn to this is an indicator, major step towards perceiving as and operating from the mind of Christ. Right here is where we're going. So.
Hey, Mike, how about defining again for us the mind of Christ?
Well, the mind, I haven't really defined it, but I'm taking this, John, out of Philippians chapter 2, the kenosis passage, where Paul says, have this mind in you, which was also in Christ Jesus. And then he goes and describes what that is. He that was in the form of God did not regard equality with God a thing to hold on to, but he let it go. It's all about letting go, releasing control. That is the mind of Christ, as stated in Philippians. And so I've taken that term, and I'm going to do some more work on it to define some, what is 4 bullet points on the mind of Christ, but it's his process in his journey to the cross. It's everything that how we see Jesus operating from, he is operating from the mind of Christ. And I think Paul, in my view, he recognized that and he gave it a label. He called it the mind of Christ. So that's my view, John. So
Thanks.
the first, it's not that we reject the binary way of thinking, which is here, which is out in these realms. No, it's the binary method, the binary process is wonderful. And it's what we use every day to navigate through life. And it's very important, but it's not the only thing. There is another set of lenses that are applied once this great death happens within our experience, this first death, it gives us a new way of seeing. And our way of seeing starts to change. And that is, I think, layer 3 is really the first step in the transformative process. When the Bible is talk about be ye transformed, this, in my mind, I've created this model to give language to it, to give a visual picture. This is what I think we're talking about, is this one-time death that teaches us how to die. It's this first seeing, this new set of lenses that we apply to everyday situations. We allow these lenses to filter first before we engage the binary way of thinking. In other words, we hold back. Guys, we slow down. We slow down so not to jump to conclusions. Just give it, just back off. And we allow things to happen and we observe. So, and that's what I'm talking about. And I'm not telling you guys anything new. At our ages in life, we've intuitively explained it. I'm just trying to give some language of how to talk about this experience that, that we've all engaged to some degree or another. So the text here, we have read this. As he was saying, for this reason, I've told you that no one can come to me unless it has been granted him from the Father. That's the context I put 65 in, of the Father drawing. The Father is working behind the scenes. Sometimes we're conscious of it, sometimes we're not. As a result of this, many of his disciples left, would no longer walk with him. Jesus said to the 12, will you go also? Simon says, gee, Lord, to whom shall we go? You have the words of eternal life. That's a great statement of faith. He's holding on to the life. He doesn't understand it, but he's holding on by faith. That's wonderful. We've already believed and have come to know that you are the Holy One of God. We've talked about all of this. Jesus answered him, did I myself not choose you, the 12, and yet one of you is a devil? There it is. I chose all of you, and I chose a devil. Jesus clearly allowed the negative to be part of the picture. Now he met Judas, the son of Simon Iscariot, for he, one of the 12, was going to betray him. And I think that John included this statement, it's John's words, under the direction of the Holy Spirit, no doubt, and that he's bringing clarification to the first century church regarding why in the world would Jesus ever allow a devil to be part of the picture. So here is John's explanation, or the fact that he did. Okay, so where I want to go today, this is the bulk of it, is we're going to look at, life on this side. Look at this as maybe defining the left side and the right side. And when we as human beings are in this first realm, layers 1, 2, and 3, in order to move from layer 1, it has to be satisfied. Layer 1 is food, water, shelter. And this is really based on modern psychology, Maslow's hierarchy of need. This is, I'm not pulling this out anywhere, but it's recognized truth about human existence. And that, if a guy is starving to death, it's really hard to share deeper things to him. He's wanting food and shelter. We just experienced a huge power outage over the weekend. We had over 70 some generators running, and we were monitoring remotely. Sunday was a work day for me, answering calls, and people who had frozen. The snow in Wyoming was going horizontal, and it was getting sucked into those running generators and being pulled into the air box, and people, they would, it would flood, it would, the generator would stop running. And so we coached, there were 3 of us on the lines over the weekend, and people, I want my power on. I want my power. I shouldn't have bought this. We're kind of in extreme circumstances right now. Let's just talk through it. And if you're willing to go outside, if you can make it outside, we can get this generator back running. And they did. And it was so fun on Sunday, because they'd call me back and, oh, I actually did it. I actually got this thing running. And, they had moved from layer 1 to layer 2 in an experiential thing. They got their power back running. So food, water, shelter. But unless that's satisfied, so the way we move in this direction, as we're being drawn by the Father, is those barriers that we've got identified with the thin lines here. They have to be satisfied, and the idea being, unless they're satisfied, we stay in that area, and it's not wrong; it's natural. The second is the idea of love. This is survival here. The first one, what we need to sustain life. This is love. This is what I call belonging. Well, it's real scribbly there. Belonging, and actually has everything to do with identity. We gain our identity in life by mirroring other people around us. We learn about ourselves by our interaction. We're made by God to be social individuals. We're made to love and to be loved, and that comes second on the list. That's layer 2, and that's also natural. Layer 3 is meaningful work, and this would be the idea of influence. That's how I labeled it, and it's power, actually. How we, once our needs are for our physical existence are satisfied, and we're in relationship, and we're loved. We learn how to love, and we learn how to be loved, then following that comes this need to contribute. We're created in God's image, and we want to apply our abilities in some manner. And all of this is natural and good. And the way we move from left to right in this model, prior to this great death that has to occur, is those needs need to be satisfied. And this is when Jesus is talking about the flesh, when Paul is talking about the flesh and so forth. This is the realm that I'm envisioning that he's talking about, these lower layers of existence, these physical layers, of which most of humanity dwells in this realm. Most of humanity dwells here.
Say, Mike,
Yo.
where would you insert the idea to understanding, to somebody explain that you can understand the world or find understanding or knowledge? There's a certain need to understand your world too. And I know it's in there somewhere, but I'm not sure where.
Yeah, well, the way my view of that, and I think, actually, let me continue on.
Okay.
No, actually, we'll talk about that next week. The short of it, Bill, is when whatever layer in my mind, and I'm not dreaming this up, in whatever is, let's say I'm in a layer 2. I can understand layer 1 and I can understand layer 2, and I can somewhat understand layer 3, but beyond that, I'm clueless.
Okay.
I don't get it. That is why, in my explanation, why the prophets were killed, why Jesus was killed, because they looked like they were from the moon. Because the layer of human consciousness was such that it was at most layer 3. And I view the same is true of the world today. That is where society exists, in the first 3 layers.
That promotes tribalism. I mean,
that's why, we talk about the mystics and these kind of people. They're marginalized because they look like they're buffoons. What on the world are you talking about? And that's at least from my perspective. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that. So I got all these scribbles on here. So what happens is that the food and shelter need, which is a normal part of existence, because of our condition in human, our fallenness, if you will, it comes out as this need to protect. It falls, it digresses, it goes back to a default mode. So I could be a man living in the 21st century in Fort Collins, Colorado, and with more resource than 99% of the rest of the world, just because I live in this state, at this time, and I can be worried about my existence. I can be an evangelical Christian, Bible believing person, and live in a state of fear that people around me are corrupting me. See, it has all kinds. That's level 1. I gave a story a couple of weeks ago about when I was going through this really difficult time, and Bob Powell was part of this whole thing. I called a group of friends together because what I believed I needed was to raise a sum of money and go out and appeal to our base of relationships and raise money so I could get myself out of hock. I was convinced I needed to do that. I was functioning at a layer 1 for that time. It was all this need to survive. And so we can go there at any time, but having gone through where I'm going to go with this, it's quite different. So need to protect. Layer 2, which is natural and moral, love. we find ourselves in a position of not able to receive love. I think that is one of the major problems of the human condition. We cannot receive love. It is very difficult. The idea of a gracious, loving God is very hard for us to receive. You go, you're crazy. Well, I'm not so sure. And where this digresses into is either I'm not worthy or you're not worthy. You're not worthy because you don't believe the way I do. You know, this whole binary way of thinking, I'm right, you're wrong. Or conversely, everybody else is right and I'm wrong. I'm not worthy to be loved. I'll move on here. The meaningful work, that making a contribution to society and my community digresses into this abuse of power and my search to carry a bigger and larger and more powerful hammer. I become someone who scolds, someone who corrects. That's where this falls into. So this is life on the left side. This is life pre-transformation. And in my view, it's where most of society lives. It's what the culture, the dominating culture of governments and the dominating culture of the church, of systems. This is where we exist. And it's still because dying is hard. No one wants to die. So anyway, I'm gonna pop all these. I got to get rid of all this stuff because we got to look at, oh, wait a minute. I think I can just move the slide. It's a different slide. All right. So now let's look at the right side. And let's say that we go through this late layer 3 and, oh man, it can go on for years. And we finally release control and we die. We become the grain of wheat that falls into the ground and dies. And as anything that dies, the promise of the gospel through Jesus Christ, which he demonstrated once and which indeed happens every day, is that resurrection always follows death. Resurrection. It's the way that God has made it. Resurrection. There is life afterwards. There's life on the right side here. So what does that look like? We've gone into layer 4, which is the idea of including the negative. Well, we're not there yet. There's still other transformative process, but the value of layer 4 is that we learn to die. We learn what it's like. And now we can look with these new lenses back through from this position right here. We can now look back and we see our life differently. We've got new lenses to apply. We see our relationships differently. And so that's what I wanted to talk about. How are they different? Well, I'm going to address each one of these here like this, right on down through. I've got a new way of seeing here, right here. New way of seeing food, water, shelter. I'm starting to have a capacity to trust, to really trust. Yeah, I know I've prayed the prayer and I've trusted Christ, but now we're talking about daily trust. We're talking about following him and trust. And I don't freak out as much. I still can freak out like I did with my friends, Bob. I can still find myself in layer 1, but I don't have to be there. Look at how the barriers are still there, but they're rendered powerless. They don't have to have power over me because I'm now operating out of a different set of lenses, and I can actually apply trust, learn to apply trust on a day-by-day basis. The idea of love, I understand, I start to understand that God loves me and I'm not talking about in a head sense, but in a heart sense. And I am safe and secure in God through Christ. And if I feel secure, Bible knowledge is important, but it's not Bible knowledge that's going to get us there. It's through an experiential dying that we learn how much we are really loved. I don't have to perform. It's irrelevant. And I am loved because I am a son. I am loved because I am a daughter. This is how we begin to see. And it has absolute bearing on what we're talking about in this book. Service, instead, meaningful work, instead of work being a means to create income, which it certainly is. It's not wrong to believe that. But I really start to look at myself as a contributor and giving a contribution to something larger, something meaningful. And it's service. I view myself as more and more as more of a servant and a contributor to a bigger picture. Need to protect. I become slower to judge. Again, through the application of these new lenses that I'm now, it doesn't mean I don't judge. No, there are some things that need to be judged, but I'm much slower. I've slowed down and allowed things to be for a period of time. About not being worthy, either myself, and that corresponds to love. Respect, again, spect, view. I view again at myself and my relationships around me. I'm much slower to judge. I value who I am with. I value, I'm free to allow others to be who they are and not categorizing people. Are they in or are they out? But just enjoying, and that's respect. It's re-seeing, again, viewing things differently, things and people around me and circumstances. The hammer, I learned, I'm now learning how to responsibly use my personal power, in my case, male energy, in your case, male energy. I now have the capacity to learn about the use of the hammer, not as a hammer to punish. And that, guy, that runs so deep in me. I think it's a human problem, but I'm from a German heritage, and by golly, if something's wrong, so we got to find somebody to blame. Someone's got to pay. And scolding and punishing. These are things I'm dealing with every day, but at least I'm catching myself. Fred does not need to be punished here. Fred needs some understanding. Fred needs some empathy. And life slows down. And this is what, in my mind, addressing these, and there are many more. But to move from here, this binary way of processing to the mind of Christ here, this in a very practical, concise sense is what I'm talking about, is what this does. And the way we get there is we die. There is no other way. And this is the message of Jesus Christ. He's not only the message, but he's going to demonstrate it in this book. The way, and he says to us, he says to all people in all periods of time, follow me. So table time through John's gospel. John's gospel account, we're privileged to observe people just like you and me who are at various places in regard to Jesus's invitation to follow me. Everybody is, a different place. Describe to the others at your table what is currently intriguing, exciting, challenging, or perplexing in your journey to follow me. Because of time, I'd love to break us up. I wish I could have finished at 7:30, but I didn't. I would much rather have table time to do this because I think we get more personal. And but we're not going to do that. We're going to do it as a group. So I'd like you guys to take a risk here and risk. Tell us how you feel about this. Feel about where your journey, and right now in your journey, where is their excitement? Where is their challenge? Where is their perplexity in your journey right now? Guys, this is an alive and a living relationship we have with Jesus Christ. Someone step out and share something about your journey at this time.
My my thought on this is that it is simpler, it is easier for me to engage in this type of thinking in the mind of Christ with those that I know are believers. The harder part for me is doing that in regards to people that I know don't believe the way I do, whether that's spiritually or socioeconomically or
Yep.
philosophically. It's much more difficult. But I'm also finding that for me, and I think it's maybe true for a lot of guys, is it's much more difficult to do this with my own family. It's easy for me to be understanding and not to judge and to try to serve and trust those that are our brothers and sisters in Christ. And even though my family, my wife and my kids and my brother and sister are, I think, Christians, other than, there are some in my life that aren't, but it's much more difficult for me to be that way with them. And I don't know why. Does anybody feel the same, that it is much more difficult to live out my faith, to live out the mind of Christ with those in my own family than it is those outside of it.
Well, Jeff, before anybody else responds, and please do, thank you for stepping out. Thank you for stating that. And by no means are you alone. By no means. You have identified the very groups that are most difficult. The question that we can start to ask ourselves is why? Why is this? And so please, someone respond to Jeff. What are your thoughts?
Okay. Family, your family used to be responsible for them, and being responsible for them, in order to be responsible, you always had to have a sense of control, especially with children.
Ah,
And as they start getting older and you don't have control over them, there's a fear factor that they're going to go south and you can't be responsible for them. And it gets really messy, especially when they start crossing swords with you. And you got to let go and say, now I'm no longer responsible for them at some point in time. And that usually comes much earlier than you're willing to admit.
Yeah. Well, and one of the things too, and I guess my thought is that a lot of this is very difficult with my spouse. And we went to a Focus on the Family Marriage intensive down in Branson. And one of the things that kind of stood out is that you don't get into each other's yard, you know. So what I tend to do, which goes away from this right side of the screen here, is that I get into my wife's yard and I try to manage her stuff. And that then becomes disrespect. That becomes judgmental. That becomes a lack of service, because I'm trying to manage something that is really not in my control. And that if I would leave that to God and to her, then she would be much more receptive to other things that I'm trying to communicate to her. But when she sees that I'm in her business, as they say, it's much more difficult to have the mind of Christ toward her.
I think, Jeff, the biggest problem is more than that. It's who defines what the yard is. You know, you can, that works as long as each of you define your yards, unless you define the yard for your wife. Here's your yard, hon. I won't bother it, but don't get out of it. I'm going like, oh man, as we grow up and children leave the home and stuff, that's going to change.
Yeah.
Well, we have the problem of even further in the sense of, I think most of our kids are not believers, okay? And I think it's part of what you've been saying, Mike, in the sense of we have to let go of that. We have to die to that. And Bill, I think you touched on that. We have to only God is going to be able to change their hearts. We can't do that, but we want to do that, okay? My wife, particularly with her kids, I'm the stepdad of, she's brought them up in the way, but particularly her youngest one who lives with us is now not only not a believer, but he's kind of anti-Christian, okay? He's gone from being 10 years, which he regards as being 10 years exposed to that. And my judgment, I don't know, I shouldn't judge, but I perceive that walking away was due to the church that he was belonged to that judged him unjustly. And so as a result, he has a negative influence because he's identifying his personal belief with the way the church wanted him to believe, kind of a thing. I don't know if that makes sense or not.
Oh, it makes perfect sense. I mean, we can probably all identify someone that has gone through that. Sad, but it's not over. We have hope. The Father's active in an amazing way.
You know, Jeff, your sort of word picture of the yard and the question of why is it so much more difficult to sort of move through these layers with those that are closest to us and get beyond. I think the word picture is instructive because taking the yard analogy, I'm not much affected by a yard on the west side of town. I live on the east side of Fort Collins, but I'm very much affected by the yard of my neighbor to the north and to the west. And that's really where the rub comes for me in terms of moving through the layers and breaking through is the closer the yard is to my yard, the harder it is to let go of the need to protect or the need to control or whatever it is. And I think it's that way with our relationships as well. It's really where the rubber meets the road.
Yeah.
Yeah, when someone's tree limb, when my neighbor on the north has, I've got 6 branches right now in the back of my yard that I'm gonna have to get out there with a chainsaw and cut them up. You know, when someone infringes on my yard, how do I respond?
So Mike, I think the gospel, you know, in a simplistic sense, this idea of follow me is, you know, we could spend an hour, we could spend days on this.
A lifetime.
Yeah. I think all of your, on the right side, we spend a lot of our life maybe trying hard to have this mind of Christ and to have these things. And there's part of our journey, I think, which requires work. But I think a lot of these things are a byproduct of relationship. And as Steve was saying, control. If you want to have a good relationship with somebody, you gotta, like you're saying, Mike, die. We gotta die, you know, to myself so that I can hear somebody. I gotta relinquish control so I can be in their presence. Isn't it intriguing what Jesus didn't say in terms of how we acquire the mind of Christ? Or why in the world did he say, follow me? And is that a lifelong process of trying harder, learn more information, or as you say, transformation? What in the world? How do we get transformed? How do we get there? How do we trust more? Is trust part of love? Huh. And if there's no trust, you really can't have a relationship. Isn't it interesting? You said too, Mike, about the heart. And Proverbs 3, 5, and 6 have always been one of my favorite verses, but it says, trust the Lord with all your head and lean not to your own understanding. Oh, no. It says trust the Lord with all your heart. Isn't that funny? Oh, your heart. Wow. So anyway, all these things, like if you ponder them inside of the mind of Christ, as you would refer, or inside of relationship, they're the things that make relationship really come alive, right? I find it so hard, like with our kids, to get into their world, to think like them. You know, how do we listen? And even our wives, right? They come from a different planet, right? Where do they think the way they do, or how do they think like that? And all of us, you know, we have different lenses and ages and personality types, came from different places. But anyway, this idea of follow me as it relates to all this is just kind of mind-boggling to me.
You know, I was talking to my pastor's become my very good friend, and they had one child, a daughter who's adult now. And they've struggled with her because she's towed the line, you know, going up in the way they wanted to. And there was some review in the Colorado and about 10, I don't know what it was, 10 places. And the 10th one was this beauty salon. And the person was reviewing the salon, was specifically referring to the petition there, how they absolutely loved her because she treated him with just kindness and understanding, and that everyone and all these nice, wonderful platitudes. And that's his daughter. And so I was talking to him. I said, you know, you think you failed because they didn't turn into the mold you created for them. And then you take a look at how their lives are blossoming, growing in a whole different direction than you would have never guessed. And all of a sudden you realize, no, you didn't fail. You succeeded. You were just looking in the wrong place.
Yeah.
And that was really interesting.
Mhm. It is interesting.
Yeah, I'm real sorry. I'm really becoming far more not tribal, but identifying with people who have orthopraxy, a proper behavior, you know, tree bearing fruit, all those kind of things, as opposed to people with orthodoxy, proper thinking. Because I'm starting to find out if we have to be in a tribe of people with common proper thinking, we'll forever be fractured. It's just not going to happen. But if we get into a tribe of common behavior, you know, we can go through all the Jesus' Sermon on the Mount and all the ends of the epistles. Common behavior is pretty well defined as the behavior of a Christian, forgiving being an element, a huge element. Then we have a fellowship that's a little more easy to define.
Mhm.
The older I get, the more I've, what should I say, release all the baggage. And I live by myself, so there's a lot of things that are different than those of you that still have kids or family or wives. But in terms of the faith journey, this idea of following Jesus, you know, if we kind of take all the different paradigms that we viewed life through and just set them aside for a moment and say, what in the world would, if I was closer to Jesus, what would he say and think? You know, how does he view this situation? And which takes me right back to everything Mike's got up on the screen here. Yeah, so rather having that bigger hammer to fix things, you know, to let go and say, So my kids, like Vince or, you know, anyway, those of us with, you know, kids, you know, we want them to turn out a certain way. We want them to follow Jesus. I guess it was Tatsi was saying that. And they're not where I would like them to be in terms of I wish they were more into service, you know, or more into about Christ and the kingdom. And so when my wife died, I said, you know, each of you got to, you know, I'd like you to share something in terms of, you know, what she meant to you. And so anyway, after the service, I was just blown away by where they were in terms of their faith journey and their relationship with their mother, but just in particular. But yeah, so this idea, anyway, enough said, but follow me, you know, isn't that all we want for, you know, our friends, our kids, that they may follow Jesus and experience life?
And sometimes our kids have to go, they just have to go through it. I've said that to my kids on more than one occasion. I said, well, you just may have to go through it. And what is underlying, it's not that I don't care at all. I mean, absolutely I care. I can't fix it. We have to learn by experience. We have to experience great pain, some of us. We have to experience great love. Those are the transformative things that change our lives. And my harping, my coaxing, my bailing out is not going to help things at all. It's only going to delay it. I've got to believe in my Heavenly Father who is drawing all people to himself. different set of lenses, guys, over here. And man, what an adventure. What a journey. On a day-to-day practical level, we start to look at sin operating within our being at a whole nother nuance. You know, why do I have to have my way right now? You know, why am I so upset? To use Jeff's analogy, why am I trying to categorize this person right now? You know, why am I so upset because of thus and so my wife did this? You know, why? You know, back off, Mike, back off. I've been saying that a lot to myself lately. Back off, Mike, back off. It's not that important. You know, we got to admit we're under some pretty severe circumstances. This, the whole COVID thing is taken its toll. I know it has on me, and at least to some degree, and there's probably way more. So, well, fellas, we're going to move on. We're going to come back to this model. I think I don't know if we're going to do it next week or not. I'm kind of working ahead a couple different teachings, but we'll kind of leaving you hanging. Well, what's after layer 4? Well, we'll probably get there, but as it comes up, then we'll talk about it. Because I'm kind of developing this as I go, but it is really helping me to understand the interactions that are taking place, and that'll really be true next week, as we see in chapter 7, the first 9 verses or so, where Jesus has this encounter with his brothers. And again, we're going to see apples and oranges, 2 different ways of thinking. And this at least gives us some graphic and language of how to understand that. So have a good week, fellas. Thanks for joining in.
Thank you, Mike.
Thanks, Mike.
Thanks,
guys.
Mike.
Thanks, Mike.
Have a good week.